Vassily Aksyonov, born in Kazan, emigrated to the United States in 1980. What is your interpretation of Glasnost?
Well, first of all, the other day I was rather pleased to hear the word Glasnost 3 times in the crowd near DuPont Circle, by the way.
DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C.,
Yeah.
section of Washington.
And that, you know, it's really great to see, to witness the penetration of our language into English, into American life. And I really have some mixed feelings with this, of course. First of all, it seems to me that the word Glasnost doesn't actually mean openness, as it interpreted in the American press. It's rather Glasnost has something to do with the voice. Glas is Russian for voice, the archaic form of the voice. So it means that it has something to do with the vocal cords, you know. So it means just to be more glasny means to be more articulate, more articulate. That is, pledging to be more glasny. They did pledge to be more glasny, but they didn't pledge to be honest, by the way. So I mean that glasness is not automatically means honesty and sincerity and this kind of things. Actually, the Glasnost is a really very significant period in the history, in the modern history of the Russian life. And I would give them Mikhail Gorbachev and his people credit for choosing this way, but not the other way, not the opposite way, not the way of oppression and terror, you know. It's really good to what's going on there, and sometimes we are really hopeful for that. Sometimes we are really awfully disappointed with this. I can give you some just the example in regard with myself, you know. Until recently, my name, as well as the names of some other emigre, exiled writers and the people of art, never been mentioned in the Soviet press, as if we never existed. Now they are mentioning our names, but they're mentioning that in the slanderous way, you know. They are tarnishing our names, you know. So they became more articulate, but they didn't yet become more honest in all fields of the society's life.
Let me turn to our other guest now. Igor Birman, emigrated to the United States in 1974, born in Moscow. Do you too have mixed feelings about Glasnost?
Yes, it seems to me that, of course, much more criticism, so to say, open criticism, is allowed now. But mostly it is a criticism of one servants to others, but not of the masters. Gorbachev has not been criticized at all in the Soviet press. Neither in the Soviet press, not at all. Neither any mistake of his close associates were mentioned in the Soviet press. So once again, Glasnost is first of all about American imperialists. Secondly, about some Soviet servants who, by one or another reason, can be criticized. But once again, not the masters.
Ilya Levin, who was emigrated to the United States in 1977, born in Leningrad. Why is Glasnost occurring now? Is there any significance to the timing?
Well, I believe the Soviet Union has reached a certain crisis point, a point where the stagnation of the Brezhnev era simply could not go on. The Soviet Union was lagging more and more behind the rest of the world. I believe that what we're witnessing now is one of the most interesting periods of Soviet history. I wouldn't say that it's time now to make definite conclusions, not yet, but it's very certainly the time to watch very closely what's going on. Igor Birman just mentioned the criticism and its limits, that more is allowed now than in the past. And it's certainly true. But what's significant is the factor of being allowed. I'll draw an analogy from literature. Now, Russian poet Osip Mandelstam divided all world literature, as he put it, into works written with permission and without permission. Works written without permission, he said, were stolen air. And those who wrote works with permission should be beaten on their heads with a stick and should be given for breakfast a cup of police tea. Now, what we're witnessing now is that the limits of the permissible have been certainly broadened, but we're still dealing with things that are permitted. We're still not witnessing the truly independent literature and independent criticism. And I realize that it might take time. And it's very possible that things, if they continue to go on in the direction of democratization, might indeed reach that stage. And that's why I believe that we really must watch closely what's happening, because it's extremely interesting.
Do you all agree, Mr. Aksyonov?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you all watch with an emotional detachment, or are you able to, now having two of the three of you been here at least 10 years, able to step back and analyze what's going on there? Or is there an emotional tie to the Soviet Union still?
Well, I should confess that my emotional ties a little bit now became loosened.
Loosened.
Yes. And I'm not so eagerly interested in what's going on in exact political situation in the country. I'm always preoccupied by the cultural field, of course, because it's my field, and I'm trying to follow all the significant events in the cultural field. For instance, and there are some encouraging signs, of course. For instance, the other night I saw the Georgian, that is Soviet Georgian movie called Repentance, and this is very significant step toward the real Glasnost, toward the real openness and sincerity. Very powerful movie. But on the other hand, sometimes you see some, the articles full of typical set of the euphemisms, all this paraphernalia of the propaganda, already worn out propaganda, especially toward the international relations. And that's maybe that's just really Ilya Levin is right, saying that it takes time, of course.
How far can it go? Do you have a sense of that yet?
Well, the important thing is not even how far will it go, but how long will it last.
Is there some doubt in your mind that it won't last very long, or that it won't last?
Anything could happen. You know, in '68, when the Soviet tanks moved in Czechoslovakia, I remember a lot of my friends were saying with a certain tone of bitterness.
I hope that Czechoslovakian tanks wouldn't move to Moscow.
Exactly, that's what we were... Vassily just said what I was going to say. My friends were of the opinion that if something like that started in the Soviet Union, then no one will bring its tanks to Russia. If we had our Dubček. Now, if what we have now is a sort of a Soviet Czechoslovakia, and anything might be possible, I wouldn't discount anything, then I suspect the tanks might be there, not necessarily Czechoslovakian tanks, but there are Soviet tanks. There are
Allegorically speaking.
Not allegorical.
Not allegorical.
no, real tanks. You know? Well, party tanks and military
Against
tanks.
real people.
No? And if a genuine reformer appeared in the Kremlin, either Gorbachev might be one, just given the benefit of all our doubts, or someone else. For every reformer, there are lots of counter-reformers. And many of these counter-reformers might have tanks at their disposal. So I don't know, it may not last. But that certainly should be our second question. Will it last? If it will, for how long? And if it doesn't last, what could be the alternatives? What would come after that?
Mr. Birman, you are shaking your head.
Yes, I think that Comrade Gorbachev and his people are trying, so to say, to improve socialism, to eliminate the most obvious mistakes. But they are not going, and I emphasize, they are not going to create a real new democratic society. In all their talks about democracy, about elections with more than one candidate, and so on, they constantly remind people about Lenin, about socialism, about old icons. So I expect that they will improve something a little bit. But then, once again, they will run into the same problems, and I am very pessimistic that during my lifetime, the Soviet Union will be a place for people to live and to pursue happiness.
Let me, at this point, take a moment to introduce you. We are going to be spending this hour and a half talking about Soviet leader Gorbachev's efforts to reform Soviet society, Glasnost, or what we here in the United States call openness. And we'll talk about what it is and what it means to the Soviet Union, what it means to the United States, its limitations and its benefits. And then you have an opportunity at this time to call up, ask your questions about the concept of Glasnost, to have a Soviet perspective on what is happening in the Soviet Union. Our guests are emigres from the Soviet Union. We'll find out a little bit more about them as we go along here. So we invite you now to use those phone numbers on the bottom of your screen and pick up the phone and get ready with your questions for our guests this evening. Gentlemen, how close is the Soviet community in the United States, or in Washington? Do you all have an opportunity to get together, even though you sort of come from different professional walks of life, and discuss what's going on?
Well, first of all, it's not a Soviet community anymore. This is rather Russian community. Yes. I would say that we are rather close to each other. We're sharing some our views quite frequently. And
some drinks.
Some drinks, of course, especially some bearded people.
So you all know each other fairly well.
Yeah, of course.
Is there any communication between you here in the United States and relatives and friends back in the Soviet Union?
I use the telephone, but by the way, that's another question mark about the Glasnost, you know. They didn't yet restore the automatic dialing system with Moscow, you know.
And that's significant.
Which used to exist, you know. Oh yes, that's very significant. It looks like a, well, not that significant point, but it is significant. They built an automatic station for the Moscow Olympic Games in 1980, and it existed for a couple of years. Then all of a sudden, everything was cut, you know, and now you have this always problem with 7 or 9 hours delay on the phone. That would be a really gracious step for them to restore, to prove the Glasnost.
What do you hear when you talk to your friends and relatives?
Let me tell you one thing, that when my friend Vassily is calling to Moscow, or when we receive some correspondence from Moscow, we know that everything is watched. Big brother is watching for his talk or for the letters which I am receiving. That is why the letters which I receive are not quite with Glasnost, I would say.
With homing pigeons, I would say.
Yeah, that's right. But we do communicate with our friends, more or less, sometimes indirectly. And we know what is going on there.
Do you have a feeling from them? Are they happy with
Yes,
us?
I recently had a talk with a younger friend of mine, and he said a little bit ironically that, you know, we had the greatest reconstruction in our time, you know, that we are all reconstructing everything, we keep reconstructing, and we are going to reconstruct, and so on. So, and when I asked him, what do you mean saying reconstruction? He said, well, I'll give you an example. The other night I was on the rock concert. A rock really blossoming, rock music really blossoming.
Music.
And that was a concert by the previously totally underground group called the Middle Russia Elevation. And
Good name for a rock group?
yeah, rock group. And they gave the really great concert. And they were absolutely, how would you say, freewheeling bunch of people, you know.
We are talking about cultural changes mostly. What about changes in everyday life? Have there been any?
Not much, you know, not much. In economy, well, Igor Birman knows more about it than I do, but changes primarily have been occurring on the pages of literary journals and in the media. And from what I understand, the Soviet man in the street quite often is a bit skeptical about the new promises, which is understandable. And we as emigres, at least, I speak for myself, feel a certain shortage of that staple of Soviet life, jokes. And that's where the population expresses its attitude towards just about anything at home and abroad. But there was this story about Glasnost, which I'm sure Vassily Aksyonov and Igor Birman know, but I'll share it with you. And it concerns the train, which is moving along, and all of a sudden it stops. There are no rails ahead. Now, how does the Soviet leadership deal with such a problem? In the past, under Lenin, they just shot the, what do you call it in English?
The
machinist.
engineer?
The engineer,
Train
exactly.
engineer.
And that was it. Under Stalin, they shot the engineer and just about every 10th passenger for sabotage.
His family.
Yeah, and his family too. And under Khrushchev, they would take the rails from behind the train and put them in the front. The train would keep moving. Under Brezhnev, they just closed the shutters, the curtains, and pretend that the train is moving. And under Gorbachev, all the passengers are ordered out the train, lined up, and ordered to shout, "No rails, no rails, no rails, no rails."
Let me take a phone call. We have, and we'll get to your comments, Mr. Birman. Phoenix, Arizona. Good evening. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm talking about Glasnost. Okay, they mention about Gorbachev trying to reform and present the best of the world, that he's the best man. But anyway, what I want to say is that since Gorbachev been in power, I mean, in Mexico City, it's amazing what is going on with the KGB. And in Spain, I'm from Spain, and I have people, family in Mexico, and I have family in Spain, and it's unbelievable what is going on the ground.
Ma'am, give us an example.
Well, like that, what is the name? The ambassador from Mexico City, he got killed in Russia by the KGB. Even just a couple of days in a newspaper, and then nothing more. They don't talk anymore about it. I don't know why America doesn't know what is going on.
All right, let's see if our guest would like to respond to that. Well, that prompted a question, and we'll get back to our caller's question. How are Mr. Gorbachev's efforts being seen outside of the Soviet borders, among our Western allies, among their allies?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that Western journalists and Western experts are much more optimistic about what is going on in the Soviet Union than the Soviet citizens. We just mentioned correspondence with our Moscow friends, and occasionally we see somebody of them visiting the United States. They are not so optimistic as the experts are. Secondly, something like 3 months ago, our Central Intelligence Agency and Defense Intelligence Agency surprised me very much by stating that the Soviet economy now is performing very well, much better in the past. I don't know how they got this information, maybe through our Marine Guards in Moscow embassy. But even in the official statements of Comrade Gorbachev himself, in statistics which we can see, in communications which we have, we understand that there are a lot of words spoken and written in the Soviet Union and very, very few real deeds. And you asked how is everyday life of Soviet citizens now? Very much the same as it was under Brezhnev.
Lines and lines.
Lines, and even less fruits, maybe sometimes. And to buy a pair of boots, a Soviet girl has to spend a half of her monthly salary. Well, it is everyday life. One more example, we have to understand it. Recently I saw that in our federal regulations, a prisoner in our jail has to have 50 square feet for himself in the jail. In the Soviet Union, it's quite enough to be in the line for 10 years to get an apartment. So you can compare.
I think that that caller's question from Phoenix referred to a possible threat from the KGB around the world. Should we be concerned about the communist threat? Does Glasnost mean a change in foreign policy on the part of the Soviet Union?
I believe that our Marines were seduced during Glasnost in Moscow.
Not before.
Maybe before, but I don't see any real changes in KGB activities for the last 2 years.
That's a great difference, by the way, between first Glasnost and second Glasnost. This Glasnost is number 2, by the way. First Glasnost was under Khrushchev, under the early 60s, as a matter of fact. And by that time, the KGB, after the series of disclosures of their activities under Stalin, kept rather low profile, you know. Meanwhile, nowadays, it's on the crest of the wave, you know. It makes difference, by the way.
Mr. Levin, would you like to comment?
Yes. There is a view according to which the whole policy of Glasnost, or restructuring, as they call it, the Soviet Union, because Glasnost really refers to the openness in the media, restructuring would be a more correct term, has been conceived by the, if not entirely by them, with a very significant help from the KGB experts, which is very possible. But what's important now, as far as foreign policy is concerned, is that this openness in the media, really unlike the first Glasnost that Vassily Aksyonov speaks about, goes hand in hand with unprecedented anti-Western slant, or rather anti-American propaganda. It reaches the heights which, I'm talking about anti-American propaganda, which it hasn't reached since Stalin's times. We can read now articles written by good journalists about how, for example, the Jonestown massacre was performed and carried out by the CIA and American troops, how AIDS, the virus of AIDS, has been conceived in American military labs. And in a most, I would say, unusual turn of propaganda development, the suppression of human rights in the Soviet Union is also being blamed now on the CIA.
That's a great,
Yeah.
invention, yeah.
And that's interesting, you know. It is from the point of view of media analysis. If you remember, Gorbachev had a meeting with writers. When was that? Last summer, right?
year ago.
Yeah.
Last June. I
Last
would
June,
say,
exactly. And at the end of that meeting, he said something which at first didn't make sense. At least didn't make sense to me. He said that the people who are for the restructuring, that himself, have lots of enemies, and these enemies will try to do everything possible to stop it, and well assumed that it was the bureaucracy. And then he said that those enemies, they're from the West, and they might even resort to terror. And everyone remembers, he said, what happened to Khrushchev. Now, we remember what happened to Khrushchev. Khrushchev was deposed by the Politburo, not by the CIA assassins or something like that.
This KGB.
Yeah. So at first it didn't make sense, period. And then, a few months after that, Soviet poet Evgeny Evtushenko came here, and he dropped what Russians was a bomb.
Excuse me, he printed that in the Time magazine.
Yes.
In Time magazine,
He
right.
gave an interview to
Oh, that's right, yes.
Time magazine, and there he suggested that two Soviet writers who had published in the West, Sinyavsky and Daniel, and who were convicted in 1966, and whose trial actually became a stimulus for human rights movement in the Soviet Union. These people were actually betrayed by the CIA.
Which doesn't
Yes,
make any sense.
No, and that too didn't make any sense at first. And then the Soviets printed in what's called now the most liberal Soviet newspaper, Moskovsky Novosti, Moscow News in Russian, a comment where it was suggested that it's only in the interests of the enemies of democracy in the Soviet Union, of the Western intelligence agencies, to have such trials. And it suggested that it's those enemies of democracy, the CIA, actually provoked this trial. So if this propaganda line goes on, then I wouldn't be surprised if we read, for example, that Stalin, under whom...
agent.
Yes, exactly. Well, after all, we did read that Beria...
But anyway,
He was
Beria
accused,
already-
Beria?
Beria was accused of being an agent of the British intelligence service. So I see no reason why Stalin, who had performed the worst human rights atrocities in Soviet history, was also working for some West intelligence service.
We'll talk about Stalin in just a second. Jamaica, New York is our next call. Go ahead, please.
Hi, yes. I want to ask you guys two questions.
Yes.
One is do they enjoy the freedoms of the United States or the restrictions of Russia, where they came from?
And your second question?
Are they going to appear as guests on Howard Stern's program?
I doubt that. I think I can answer for them. Are you enjoying the United States? Have you adjusted?
Oh.
Have you accepted American life?
Well,
I am.
we are.
Was the adjustment difficult?
Yes.
There are a lot of the, well, you know that in a way we are already considering ourselves partially local people, and so what we are now we can afford not to thank but also criticize United States in some fields, and so I would say that there are a lot of the things in this country which might be criticized
And should be.
and should be criticized, of course. But anyway, the life here is really exciting and promising, and
It's normal life.
it is a normal life with the dark sides, bright sides, and that's most important. This is a life of the certain human body, if I would be daring to compare the country to human body.
All right, let's go to Glendale, California. Good afternoon.
Hi, I'd like to ask your guest about the role of ideology and the Marxist propaganda in the educational system and how that relates to people like Gorbachev's perception of the U.S. I mean, do they think that he has an accurate perception of the United States? I mean, he is a Marxist-Leninist, so how accurate do they think he perceives what the U.S. is?
All right, let's try that.
I think that Gorbachev sincerely thinks that he has a very correct reading of American life, but he doesn't. I think that being raised with the Soviet propaganda, with the Soviet ideology, being very, very successful in his career, he sincerely believes in Marxism. And he is kind of exception, by the way, in the Soviet Union. Don't be surprised, but I think there are much more Marxists in the West, sincere Marxists, than the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, they know what it is. Marxists of our country, of America, because for me now America is my country, Marxists of Western Europe do not understand what they're talking about, and that is why they are Marxists. But Gorbachev, I believe that he is an honest Marxist.
Anyone else on that?
The greatest misconception of this country, which exists in Soviet Union, is, it seems to me, is the conception of the United States as a decadent country. The United States is not a decadent country by any means, you know. And they still believe, their leadership in Soviet Union, as well as the many average people, that the United States is a country of bourgeois decadence. I would say, in a way, Soviet Union is more decadent country than the United States.
How do you mean?
I mean that there's some. Well, let me extend a little bit this metaphor, I would say. This is a metaphorical approach to the question, of course. I would say that they are just, they're making the great mistake underestimating just the masculine power of this country, you know. And this is a rather dangerous mistake. They should realize that the people of this country is strong, energetic, dynamic, and they don't like to be defeated at all. You know, that's what I mean.
Well, nobody does.
Mr. Levin, comment on that?
I think that indeed abroad, outside the Soviet Union and in this country, you can find many more Marxists than in Russia. Despite all the indoctrination. I remember when I was a student at the University of Texas, I mortally offended some of the people there, some of my friends on the faculty, who, figuring that I was from the Soviet Union and had studied, which is true, Marxism, Leninism at school and later at the institute, was a big authority on it, and wanted to discuss with them. I told them that I wasn't interested, and none of my friends were. It was just a ritual, all those courses, and that's it. No one takes them seriously. But the first people who took them seriously I encountered on campus.
Grand Rapids, Michigan. Good evening.
Yes, two questions. First one is, I hope you got a chance to read this issue. People magazine printed an issue about the Soviet people in April, early April of this month. And I was just wondering if you could comment and let us know if you feel that that was a fair appraisal. Hopefully you've seen that article. And the second one is, do you think that with Glasnost there'll be an article printed in the Soviet Union trying to educate the Soviet people in the same way about the American people.
All right,
For myself, I'd like to see it going both ways.
thank you. Did you all see the People magazine?
No, I missed it.
No, I didn't.
I saw it. I haven't had a chance to read it closely. I just leafed through it. Well, frankly, I'm of two minds about it. On the one hand, it's great, of course, that people here would learn more about Russia. But from my very cursory look at it, I had the impression that it was filled with cliches, you know, but superficial, you know. For example, they do an article about literature. Who do they choose? Ilya Semyonov, author of pulp novels.
Oh, why not? He's very successful.
Well, I think he's successful.
very successful,
Well, he's
but-
successful, he's popular, but
He's sort of a Robert Ludlum of Soviet literature.
yeah, but okay, but if you do an article on American literature, you know, in an issue of, say, Огонек devoted to America, and the only section on literature, the only writer you're dealing with is Robert Ludlum, will this be a fair picture of American literature?
But if you would set up the bestseller list in Soviet Union, you would put
Not on the first place.
Yulian Semyonov in the first place.
That's right. Well, I guess, Vassily Aksyonov is correct, but there's not an article about the bestseller list in the Soviet Union. The article was supposed to present, you know, the faces that were the most typical Soviet writer. I don't know. On the other hand, maybe Ilya Semyonov is the proper author for the readership of People magazine. I don't know.
Mr. Birman?
We have to recognize that Americans, in general, including maybe many, so to say, experts, know the Soviet Union much, much worse than the Soviets know America and Americans. The stuff which is put in our popular journals, on TV, with all due respect, in some other means of mass propaganda or media, whatever you will say. Here is really, as my friend Ilya just said, is very superficial, with many terrible mistakes. On the other hand, rather often it is honest. A journalist doesn't know, but he's trying. In the Soviet Union, they know, but they are not honest very often. They convey propaganda. They convey terrible things which Ilya mentioned. So, of course, it would be great to answer the question. Of course, it would be great if the Soviet mass media would be more honest about real life in America, as we know it.
We'll get back to that question of the media. Let me take this call. Portland, Oregon. Go ahead, please.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
I missed what he had to say about Americans' conception of the USSR, but I'm trying to wonder how we are learning anything by listening to you three persons. I have not heard very much positive said about the USSR. I believe there is a lot that we Americans do not get through our press. I believe that we are manipulated and that we only get certain information. For instance, I am reading the Russian version of the Second World War. It does not in any way compare to the history books here in America of how that war was fought. Now, you guys aren't old enough to have been there and to know that the Russians largely defeated Hitler, but our young people are brought up to believe it was the American forces over there and the British that did it. Now, come on. Are you guys going to be traitors to your country, or aren't you going to tell us something really positive, or could you if you had the chance?
All right, Portland, thank you. Mr. Birman, you
Two
motioned.
things. First of all, when we discussed this program, I suggested to a man from your staff to invite here somebody from the Soviet embassy to have a dialogue. Instead of us, three emigres. Let's put here Vladimir Posner, the darling of American TV since recently, or Mr. Vitaly Churkin, and let's argue. Secondly, you see, I don't know how my friends feel. I immigrated from the Soviet Union. I have not immigrated from Russia. I was born there. It was my country. It is still partially my country. I love it, but I hate the regime. And I am very open on this. I am telling you how I hate this unhuman regime. But if you ask me about people, about great writers, by the way, one of them is Vassily Aksyonov and others, I love them. Don't misunderstand me. I love Russia. I hate the Soviet Union.
Well, as regard the Soviet history, the history of the World War II in particular, I would say that it's awfully distorted. It's awfully, really distorted, and that would be the great benefit for all Russian people and for the Glasnost in the country, if they would restore the history. They talk about that, but so far very shyly, very timidly. They talk on this subject. That's maybe the main concern for the restoration of the memory, restoration of the history. Just recently, I needed some. For my writing, I needed some historical data, and I took an official textbook of the party's history. I needed just some names of the participants of the party congresses, during the 20s. I presumed that I would find a lot of propaganda, but I needed just names. I didn't find the names. I didn't find the names of the participants. I didn't find the names of those who were elected to Politburo, say on the party's Congress number 10, number 11, number 13, because there were almost all of them were undesired people, They used not to mention the names, The names of some undesired people are so habitually disappearing from the textbooks, even from the films, We all, guys, remember how that Nikita Khrushchev gave his generous kiss to first astronaut Yuri Gagarin, And when after Khrushchev was deposed, it disappeared. Gagarin remained on the same photographs, but without a kiss, He was deprived of this historical kiss, That's a problem.
Kiss.
And the examples like this are regretfully in a great number, that's numberless examples like this. If they are going to make it seriously, Glasnost, they would have to restore the history and the history of the World War II also.
Mr. Levin.
I believe that we're being more than positive now towards not only Russia is separate from the regime, but actually to the regime itself. We're trying to find as much positive as we can in what's going on currently. So I believe that our caller must have missed the first part. We're being more than generous, I think, to what's going on. And precisely as emigres, I guess, would have more hope towards what goes on there now. And we are trying to find any encouraging signs. And there are a few of them, but there are also signs pointing in the opposite direction. That's why it's so interesting to watch.
There are some encouraging signs, of course. First of all, the release of the political prisoners.
That's right.
That's a really great.
Some of them.
Great step. Really great step. You know, that's. It makes me hope.
No, it's of course it was undoubtedly designed, at least partially, for PR purposes. But as far as I'm concerned, I think you can work for PR in different ways, by arresting people or by releasing them. So if they want their PR aims achieved by releasing people, that kind of PR is fine with me.
Exactly.
We want to, as we go along here, let our viewers know you all a little better. Ilya, Levin, what do you do for a living?
For a living, I'm trying to watch what's going on in the Soviet Union. Last year I got my PhD in comparative literature from the University of Texas. So I'm trying to read books and write a talk about them.
Mr. Birman?
Well, I was an economist, a specialist, at least I pretended to be a specialist on the Soviet economy, and I'm still pretending. I consult the US government, particularly the Pentagon, on the Soviet economy.
Mr. Aksyonov?
I'm teaching at Johns Hopkins University and Goucher College in Maryland.
And several references to your being a novelist or an author. What
Yes,
books do you
exactly.
write?
I am. That's my main field. Writing novels.
Can you give us an example of one so that...
The Burn was published a couple of years by Random House in translation, and The Island of Crimea. Island of Crimea. And now that my new book on my American impression is coming out on the end of May, as a matter of fact, yes.
All right, New Orleans, Louisiana. Good afternoon.
Hi, I'm sorry I turned in late. I want to tell these gentlemen, that last caller, I don't think she ever read Orwell, who pointed out that Hitler was a dilettante in terror when compared to Stalin.
Exactly.
Probably murdered 3 or 4 times as many people. But when you're talking about World War II, it seems to have been gone down some Orwellian memory hole that Stalin was Hitler's loyal ally from, I believe, late August of '39, the invasion of the Soviet Union. And had Hitler not attacked Stalin, Stalin would have probably kept as Hitler's faithful ally. And in all this hoopla about the end of World War II, I believe it was the peoples of the Soviet Union, especially the Russian people, who defeated the Nazis, despite probably the best efforts of the communists. I'm sure you recall in '37, Stalin had the General Staff of the Red Army executed, which meant that there were virtually no field commanders with experience. So I'm sick of this talk about how the Soviet government defeated Hitler. The Soviet government's incompetence virtually destroyed Russia. And the second thing I'd like to point out, if these people want to talk about it, from all I've read, I'm not an expert in Soviet history, but it seemed that at Stalin's death, he was getting ready to carry out his own Holocaust against the Soviet Jews by carrying out literally the extermination of Soviet Jewry. And I'm wondering, all of these things seem totally unknown in this country. And I'd like you, gentlemen, if you'd like to comment on that. By the way, I admire you greatly, and I admire the peoples of the Soviet Union. And I'm probably one of the few Americans who's read all 3 volumes of the Gulag Archipelago, which
Very good for
I
you.
think perhaps the most, I'm sorry I don't read Russian, I had to read an English translation, one of the most incredible books ever written. And in the Soviet Union, people are kept from reading it by the secret police, and here it's in every library, but the American people, I guess, are just too lazy.
All right, thank you, New Orleans. Who would like to take those comments?
Well, the gentleman from New Orleans is really, well, I would say that he is totally right, and he has done the great job of reading the 3 volumes of Archipelago Gulag. That's true, but and I'm really pleased to hear that how his view on the Soviet Union is correct, and it shows that real understanding and the willingness to know more, to find out more facts and more to get more knowledge of this. And that's what the Soviet people desire, you know, to know more, to restore the memory, and some encouraging things are taking place nowadays in the Soviet Union, but not on the extent, not yet on the extent desired by many. And I would say that we still keep our fingers crossed and observing all these events. The lady from Portland is really wrong thinking of us as people trading our former homeland to some benefits from here. It's not true. We are, if I would say about myself, I'm still, maybe even now more, thanks to my working with the Russian literature as a university professor. I'm deeper and deeper involved with the Russian culture, with Russia as a spiritual image. You know, I'm getting further and further away from the Soviet conception of Russia. You know, and that's the great difference.
My question is this: if Gorbachev can succeed in this opening to more freedom for the Russian people, do you think that the 20th century Russia can produce some more great novels besides Pasternak?
All right, thank you, Seattle.
Very good question.
Mr. Lehman, Mr. Birman?
Well, I'm certain of that. You see, right now, you can read Soviet literary journals, not just in order to follow what's going on there, but sometimes for pure aesthetic pleasure. And regardless, and that's important, regardless of Gorbachev's own subjective intentions, which we are trying to gauge, but which in the long run are not really, almost not relevant. The forces, the literary forces that are being set in motion now may produce things which perhaps go beyond Gorbachev's and his aides' expectations, and will produce a certain, I hope, will produce a certain new aesthetic atmosphere. And yes, I certainly hope that things that used to be considered underground literature just a few years ago will, if only for a limited period of time, for as long as this Glasnost thing continues, be printed over there, and more importantly perhaps, there will be no longer stigma attached to publishing abroad, which will free the hands of many writers.
I kind of disagree. You know, I hate to say so, but still under Soviet regime, under Stalin, we had Bulgakov, the greatest maybe writer. We had Solzhenitsyn under Brezhnev. You see, of course, it's very good to have freedom, to be allowed to print what you write and so on, but sometimes it is a historical paradox. Maybe suffering, maybe a hard life. I'm not a writer. What I write, I pretend is not fiction. But it seems to me that sometimes it helps. You see, the Soviet literature,
that will be always enough. Suffering, suffering will be always enough.
Well, but you know, Igor, the important thing to remember is that sometimes under really strict regime, things may be written, but they will not be read.
But let me say that in the long run, I would share Ilya's optimistic views on the future of the Russian literature. But in short run, you know, I wouldn't be so optimistic now, because you know that I belong to the wave, to the great movement of the late 50s and early 60s in the Soviet literature. That was spontaneous movement of the creative forces, totally unexpected by the authorities, by anyone in the country. You know, you guys remember this poetry fever and so on and so on. That how that this all those numberless striking novels turned up and so and so. Now. It's still very little feedback, you know. It's always originated from above. We can witness the lack of spontaneity, I would say, lack of feedback from the younger generation, I would say so. The only true spontaneous activity I can observe now. This is in pop music, by the way. The Soviet literature under Brezhnev regime was awfully maimed, and there are a lot. The Writers' Union, I believe that Writers' Union is maybe the most conservative, creative union in the country, even compared to the movie makers or the painters or some composers and so on and so on. Because in order to write even bad music, you have to know the notes. But in order to write the bad novels, you don't have to know anything. And there is a reign of mediocrities, a reign of the hacks, as a matter of fact, who are poisoning the atmosphere in Soviet literature. But I'm hopeful, really, for the future, but not for the immediate future.
Austin, Texas is next, and we'll get back to you, Mr. Levin. Austin, go ahead, please.
Hi. Yes, I have a question for Mr. Levin.
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I have a question for Mr. Levin. He said that he went to the University of Texas, and I'm a student at the University of Texas, so I was interested to hear that he had experienced what I have to experience, which is we have a large number of Marxists on our campus. I want to ask him why he thinks that Marxism has such an attraction for Western intellectuals.
All right, thank you.
No idea whatsoever. You know, I may try a guess. Perhaps some people view it as a sort of, how shall I put it, alternative ideology, or just something new, you know, that should be, as it were, tried and tested. That's about it. Perhaps another reason might be, at least among people in the humanities, at least some of the people I know, is that some of the best literary scholars of this century, like Walter Benjamin, or Georg Lukács, or Yuri Tynyanov, called themselves Marxists. They were Marxists in a different sense. And that may have made a number of people curious and try to explore Marxism as such. So that's quite possible.
San Diego, California, good afternoon.
Okay.
Go ahead, sir, you're on the air.
Oh, hi. I was listening to these guys talk about what they seem to imply are incredible differences between the United States and the Soviet Union. But I'm wondering if historically there is that much difference between nation states. If you consider the Soviet Union under the Tsars, everything came from the top down. They were as cruel and as authoritarian as they are implying that the Levinists are. In the United States, for instance, what we did in the beginning of our history to the Indians and to the blacks and to other people seemed to me equally as cruel. So ethnocentrism and exchanging ethnocentrism seems to me to bring about interesting changes of attitudes in people's behavior. In terms of literature, I'm wondering if almost all countries, most of the writers tend to be hacks, and only a very select few tend to be superior in the sense of our Hemingways and Faulkners and what have you.
All right, let's work with...
Pause for a reply?
Yes, thank you. Should we start with the question that perhaps there are more similarities between the United States and the Soviet Union than we've brought to the table here?
As far as the history is concerned, you know that I would say that it's hard to find in the history of the humankind this period of serenity and absence of violence. All countries were violent, and France and Great Britain and all of them they were slave traders, they were, well, what else? But if you would recall the Russian history, the history of the modern Russia, you know that we have some similarity, Russia and America. The slaves were liberated here almost exactly the same time as the serfdom was abolished in Russia, 3 or 4 years earlier than civil war in the United States, it seems to me. In 1861, that was the pivotal point in Russian history. Since then started the new period of the growing liberalism, you know. That was time when Tsarists gave in many fields, you know. It became the more lenient and rather constructive in liberalism procedure, you know. The courts of the juries was established, some multi-party institutions like state Duma, parliament, with limited opportunities, but anyway, it existed, and so on. So Russia was rapidly heading toward the Western type democracy before the 1917, so that we had a lot of the similarity with the development of Russia, and even some Russian poets were writing the poems calling the Russia the new America, you know. So, you know, the Bruce, for instance, and others. But it was terminated right away, and Russia was cut off of the family of nations. And now, by the way, I understand why our Western journalists and Western public are so eager to see the Russian the improvements inside Soviet Union, to see any signs of hope, any signs of the coming democracy. It seems to me that the West and Western community awfully misses Russia as a part of community, you know. For 7 decades, it was the natural part of the Western community was cut off of it. Not only the Russians were robbed of the Western civilization, but the Western civilization was robbed of Russian achievements, you know. That's why it seems to me that the people in the West are so eager to see any signs of future reconciliation.
Do you think that the Western media has over-exaggerated the significance of this?
You know that Western media is so chaotic, I would say.
Chaotic?
In a way, there is no any central commission which regulate the Western media. You can find one view and totally opposite view here and here. But in general, the Western media doing the great job, talking about the different sides, sometimes mistakenly, and we are here to help.
Any comments on
If
that?
asked.
All right. Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts. Good evening.
How you doing? I'm a student at Boston College, and I traveled to Leningrad at the end of May. And my question was, while I was there, I met a student about my age, and we began talking about Gorbachev and his new plan of Glasnost. And the student I met, he called Gorbachev another Stalin. And I wondered what kind of comments you'd have about this and maybe why he'd say such a thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Is that the view of young people in the Soviet Union now?
Of some, evidently. Maybe it's too much. I don't see Gorbachev as a new Stalin, but he is not a liberal at all. You see, he is a darling of Western press as a reformer, as a cultural man, as a struggler with the bureaucracy and so on and so on. He is a typical, well, not typical maybe, but still he is, it's not typical, no, I was wrong. But he is a Soviet bureaucrat. Once again, he believes in Marxism. He would not hesitate, I don't know, to move tanks maybe, if it's needed.
Mr. Levin?
You know, someone called Gorbachev recently, Gorbachev's program of reconstruction enlightened Stalinism. And there is a bit of truth of that. You know, we can call Gorbachev, you know, a simplified way of putting things, kind of a symbiosis of Khrushchev and Stalin. You know, you have a reformist with certain Stalinist methods. For example, in this restructuring thing, there are certain features of a classic purge, of course, purge of the old Brezhnev cadres. You know, of course, people not shot; they're just removed. But still, a purge is a purge. But as far as his being a Marxist is concerned, and a Soviet bureaucrat, we must realize one thing, that a Soviet reformer can't be anyone else, you know. He doesn't come from the streets, you know. He can come only from the ranks of the party bureaucracy.
True.
We shouldn't judge him by his origin, we should judge him by his actions, and more importantly, by the consequences of these actions.
Does he have any serious opposition within the bureaucracy towards his effort to reform?
No doubt.
He does.
I'm afraid that I believe that the real opposition to him is very much exaggerated by the Western press, and maybe even by him, because you see, he is now at the helm for 2 years. A lot was said, almost nothing was done. He has to justify it somehow. And maybe it's a good excuse to say, well, it's bureaucracy, I cannot overcome them, and so on and so on. We have to understand that he is the real master of the country. He orders, other listens, and rather often implement. Not always, but no orders in the world are implemented 100%. Look at our president.
Walla Walla, Washington. Good evening.
Yes, I have a question. In the People magazine, there was an article about medical school training in Soviet Union, and it said it is the same as the American paramedics. Could you please comment?
Disagree.
Vassily Aksyonov should know about that.
No,
he was a medical student.
I used to be.
You used to be a medical student?
Yeah, yes, I graduated from a medical institute some 100 years ago. Well, the medical education takes 6 years in the Soviet Union, and after that you graduated as a doctor for general medicine, and only after then you can specialize in some different fields of medicine. And I don't really know how the nurses are trained in Soviet Union. It seems to me that there are some 3-year term of training.
Somebody criticized us for being too harsh on the Soviet Union. Let me be positive on the Soviet Union and harsh on my new country.
Yeah.
American medical equipment and American medicines are great, but I really don't think that American medical doctors or specialists are really much better than the Soviet doctors. You should not forget that Soviet doctors are working in very, very hard conditions. So I disagree with that comment.
Tenleytown, Pennsylvania. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Can I speak direct to you while I'm looking at you, right?
Yes, go right ahead.
You're fine. You know, I'm a little older than you three people over there, and I think you haven't got enough of the history entirely of the Soviet Union. You know, in 1917, after World War I, 1918, I agree with you, there's tremendous oppression in the Soviet Union. I don't disagree with that. But I think she comes from a state very autocratic. And at the same time, she developed the paranoia for the simple reason after World War I, we had troops over in Archangel, if you remember. You remember that part of history?
Which
Say that again, sir.
In Archangel. It was, I believe, one company.
Okay.
My second point is this. I'd like to have your attitude. What do you think of the black problem in the United States? And Civil War didn't end the black problem over here. In fact, we had a revolt about 18 years ago, and it still isn't finished. Then the third point I have is this. What do you think of our policy with Africa, where we see that they, during the past year, have killed over 3,000 people and have 25,000 people in jail, you know? And then also, what about our attitude on Nicaragua? I'd like to know your thinking on these specific things that I bring up.
All right, thank you, Tanleytown. Okay, a couple of different issues. Mr. Birman, you want to start out?
Well, in terms of Archangel in Russian, we say Arkhangelsk.
Arkhangelsk, yes.
It was, I believe,
It's
a
a kind
few
of the
hundred
Russian
people.
type of Los Angeles. But
Well, right. It was a few hundred of soldiers. I don't think that it played any significant role, and you should not say that America at that time was in real war with young Soviet Union. I don't think it was of any significance. Now, about the problem with blacks in America, it is a very, I would say, severe, serious problem. We regret that it still exists. We must be honest.
yeah.
The progress was great, but not enough. I think a lot has been done. Much more must be done. No question about this. Well, if we compare with the Soviet Union, don't make a mistake. It is a racist society. There are very serious tensions between different nations. Not only in regard to Jews. Armenians and Georgians are struggling with each other.
Yeah.
Estonians, for example, very unhappy about Soviet occupation of the three
Central
countries.
Asia.
Central Asia problem. Look, of course, America is not paradise. No question on this. We have many very real problems. But I don't think that even in this particular point about racial tensions, America is worse than the Soviet Union. I don't think so.
You know, what's important to remember, I think, is that with the problems we have in this country, racial problems, mainly one thing they illustrate, that there are certain limits to what the government can do. You know, lots of, a large part of these problems have to be resolved by the society, by the people themselves. Whereas in the Soviet Union, where we do have a racial problem, an ethnic problem, and it would require more than this show to talk about it, we have policies actively instituted, supported, and encouraged by the government. See, and if this so-called restructuring does something about that, that could be a welcome development. But in that regard, in that area so far, I have seen no changes. Maybe Igor, Birman, or Vassily Aksyonov will correct me on that, but so far no encouraging signs in that area.
Well, I would say that among those things which are really attracting me to this country, the racial and ethnic multifarousness is maybe most attractive for me, you know. I really enjoy walking on the streets here to see the faces of all hues of color, you know, and of any ethnic groups in the world. Sometimes I even suspect that some Carthaginians are also in the crowd, you know. That and it's really great for this country. This is a new ethnos turning up in this country. Sometimes when I visit Europe, I even I catch myself a little bit disappointing by homogeneous panorama of the streets with the faces. I really miss this ethnic variety of this country. Of course, I do agree it's not perfection. Of course,
it's not.
There is no, but it makes the absence of perfection makes this country more interesting for me as a writer, by the way. Yeah, and in Soviet Union, it's not Soviet Union is also not a perfection by far, I would say so. But it also it's really interesting country for a writer, and it's I would say that there's some artificial implementation of the so-called independent national cultures in Soviet Union. Eventually brought about a lot of losses to the society. Instead of make way for the natural process of melting, they created artificially some even some unexisted literatures of the small nations, which gave birth to some monstrous things and didn't diminish the inter-ethnic tension and so on. So a lot of the problems here and the more problems there. And so that I would say that here we see the better model of the relationship between the different ethnic groups than any place in the world.
I am an economist, and I am accustomed to talk in numbers. So to say great Russians are now something like 51% of all Soviet population. Now, if we look at the composition of the real ruling body of the Soviet Union, the so-called Politburo, and the Secretariat of the Central Committee, it's about 20 people. Among them, we see one Georgian, one Azerbaijani, one Belarusian, and one or two Ukrainians. So something like 80% of the central ruling bodies of the Soviet Union are great Russians. So you can talk about equity, about good racial relations.
In other words, Igor, what we need is affirmative action in the Politburo.
Well, it would be only the beginning.
Let's go to Moraga, California. Good afternoon.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to thank all your panelists first for joining us today. And I would like to bring history as a great teacher. I'd like to bring it into the 1987. We have touched on the fringes of the subject, but could each of your panelists please bring to light the view on Gorbachev's view of new openness? Thank you.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure about the question.
Yes.
I'm not sure, but I mean, I think that's what we spent out.
Just think.
I'm not sure. What should I?
Yeah, I apologize to that viewer because I had a sense that he hung up before I had a chance to ask him exactly what he meant.
Yeah.
Let me ask you more specifically about the situation with Andrei Sakharov and his release to Moscow. Was that particularly significant, and what role now is he playing?
It is extremely significant. His release was extremely significant, and now that Carrie, there is some disappointment among this emigre community on the Sakharov stand right now. But I believe that he hasn't changed. first of all, hasn't changed. He's trying to, maybe he's a little bit tired. He's just a little bit tired. And any human being can be tired, especially after the 7 years of this abominable isolation in Gorky, you know. But anyway, he's still, for me, is a symbol of the human rights movement in the country. And that's maybe one of the most significant steps taken by the Gorbachev administration toward the real Glasnost, to give the Sakharov chances to speak out. And that is, in a way, maybe this harbinger of a real opposition club in Russia. And if they would be allowed for a long period, if they would be allowed to establish themselves as a club of opposition, that would be the really great significance.
I think Vassily Aksyonov is right. And it's one of those examples of actions which might have been taken, I admit that, for narrow PR purposes, but which may have and will have, in the case of Sakharov, consequences that go far beyond any PR. Sakharov is a symbolic figure, and judging by his statements after his release, he has not changed a bit, and he is still as independent as he was before, no matter that some people may be happy or unhappy with the statements. Sakharov mainly expressed his own view, and he never pandered to view of any group on this or that side of the government.
Mr. Birman?
I'm a little bit, just a little bit of different opinion. You see, the significant thing is that Sakharov never condemned the system, the regime. He called very powerfully, and I deeply respect this great man. He called the authorities to abide their own laws. He was asking for Glasnost. He used the word before Gorbachev, by the way. He was protecting human rights and so on and so on. But in my memory, he never said anything against the regime as such, against the Soviet power. So maybe because of this, he was a little bit released. You see, another very important thing. The release of Sakharov was reported in the West, but not in the Soviet Union.
Oh, that's
The Soviet media didn't tell the Soviet readers, viewers, listeners a word about the release of Sakharov.
Who knows that?
Well, they do know because of Voice of America, because but here is Glasnost for you. Just exactly the example of new Glasnost. This very big event, the master of the country is calling, is phoning to Sakharov, talks to him, all the world knows about it, and it is not said.
Let's take one more call here. Lincoln, Nebraska, go ahead, please.
Yes, this will take somewhat of a different tack, but I have a couple literary questions.
All right.
First, what, if any, influence and in what regard might literary people on the panel hold the authors of the Soviet Revolution, Maxim Gorky or Isaac Babel, and also what and who, if any, American authors might be important to them or have influenced them?
All right, thank you. Mr. Aksyonov?
What about the first part of the question? The Maxim Gorky influenced
and
whom?
Babel.
And Babel influenced whom?
Well, I thought
their influence on us, on the
Soviet
contemporary
Union.
Soviet literature.
Yes, I think so. I think that was it.
Well, I would say that the Maxim Gorky, as a father of the official literary doctrine called the socialist realism, is now actually denounced by many independent writers, in Soviet Union. As a writer, he is acknowledged by many. He wasn't a bad writer, by the way. He was prolific, and he was writing rather...
He was even better than Ilya Semyonov.
Yeah, handsomely. Well, but anyway, Isaac Babel, who was executed in 1939, who disappeared in Gulag without any traces, you know, he is a genius of the modern Russian literature. He's one of the fathers of the real movement of the literature, of the celebrated Russian avant-garde. As regard to the American literature, the American literature is awfully popular in Soviet Union, and we all gone through the influence of the Hemingway and Faulkner and others, and now the Russian readers, I would regret to say they pay more attention to the translations.
Stephen King, right?
Yeah, Stephen King than to maybe even to Yulia Semyonov.
Yeah, Stephen King is awfully popular.
Is he?
But you know, I can't forget that little introduction to one of his stories published in Literatурная газета. It was, I don't remember, it was before Glasnost or in the beginning of Glasnost, and it commended Stephen King greatly. And the author of the introduction also stated that people of Stephen King's convictions, his progressive views, his present as anti-establishment, have to suffer a lot in the United States. I wonder if Stephen King knows how much he's suffering in the United States.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you all, gentlemen, very much for joining us for this hour and a half.
Thank you, Carrie.
Ilya Levin, Igor Birman, Vassily Aksyonov.
Aksyonov.
Aksyonov, I know, I apologize.
It's okay.
Thank you for joining us also this afternoon.